rates as well. So some of the smaller markets you see down on the right-hand side are blighted by issues which have really impacted their growth in the past. So we look at really what makes a hosted VoIP market grow. The first point is behavior of the incumbent. So if the incumbent has moved, and you look at the markets where the incumbent has taken proactive steps to move towards hosted VoIP and IP services, they've traditionally done the market in the early days. KPN have done well, and that's why the Dutch market's also grown as well recently. But then if you look at service providers like Belgacom, who haven't really made that move to IP or VoIP services, there's been a real lack of growth there. Underlying infrastructure is also very important. So if you look at a market like Italy, which has been blighted by issues of regulation as well, where the network was not opened up to the rest of the providers, there's a really lack of affordable and reliable service across the country, which has really impacted the growth in the market there. Regulation also plays a key point as well. If the market's heavily regulated and the incumbent has a strong position there, obviously has impacted the growth. Italy again is a key point in this, where we haven't seen much growth in the past. But other European countries have also impacted this. What we've also seen is, although UK is not in the, or potentially may not be in the EU much longer, we haven't seen a common European policy being put in place. So we're seeing very nationalised services of hosted VoIP and SIP trunking. We're only starting to see a few service providers now start to move out of that and offer multinational services. And there are a few people here today which will be speaking about that as well. Business demographics also plays a key point. So where we've seen hosted VoIP be really powerful, really strong in the past is in the SME. If you look at the Netherlands and the UK, they have strong SMEs and a large number of SMEs. And they've really started to drive the market there. If you go to Germany, which is typically the companies in Germany are a bit larger, and there's not so much of an SME growth, we've really not seen as much growth as we would have expected in a market of that size. This slide here, when we're looking across the markets, it's very hard to find a common denominator of how big the actual market is, the total market. So what we've done here is looked at the total employee base in each of these markets and used the number of hosted VoIP seats compared to that to give a penetration into these markets. We would, if we had the data and was it possible to do, we'd look at the actual number of available users, because obviously not every employee in each of these countries is going to be using a service, but as a common denominator across all the markets, it's a good way of actually showing exactly where these markets are in terms of penetration. So the Netherlands is by far the most advanced market in terms of penetration in Western Europe. We've seen that for a while, and although it's not, we've had just over 1 million hosted VoIP seats, it's still not, that actually translates to quite a lot of market penetration. The UK is quite a large market in terms of number of employees, so although that number of 8% of the total market, as we saw from the slide two slides ago, there are a large number of hosted VoIP seats in the UK. Portugal is an interesting case because there aren't many service providers. There's 8 service providers that we're tracking who are offering hosted VoIP services in Portugal. And if you actually look at who's offering and who's done well in that market, there's one clear market leader who's really driven this market forward in the past few years. There's starting to be some signs of growth in the market, but at the moment, although market penetration is high, the number of actual VoIP seats in the market isn't very high. France we're seeing is a very fast-growing market, and we've started to see not just the incumbent start to take up hosted VoIP services and sell them strongly, but a large number of other providers start to enter into that market. And we're starting to see a kind of a mid-range of large service providers offering the hosted VoIP services now into that market. So we imagine and we believe, and speaking to service providers, that there will be quite a lot of growth in the French market coming forward in the future. Belgium, it's a very small market, as many of you know, but it's quite a strong market in terms of new providers, not the incumbent. So we're seeing some providers enter the market, and they've done fairly well in that market, although it's not the largest market, so it'll be interesting to see what the future is for Belgian providers in that space. Germany, again, a very large market, the largest in terms of total number of employees, all of these countries, but actually a very low number of hosted VoIP seats. The move to IP has been forced upon the German market by the incumbent Deutsche Telekom. And the 2018 date has actually meant that a lot of service providers are now just selling SIP trunking services to move everyone off ISDN. But it doesn't really seem to be too strong of a story to move into hosted VoIP in the future. So, although it's moving to SIP trunking, we're not really sure. The market has a lot of potential to move to hosted VoIP afterwards, so there is an opportunity there to move into that. The Spanish market has a lot of service providers in there, and a lot of them are sort of SME focused and have a large number of bases in each of the countries. So if you actually look, quite a few have offices spread across the country. And we're starting to see a number of those start to grow quite quickly. A lot of them build off their own self-built switches as well, which is interesting to look at our market. And the Italian market has really not grown fast at all due to the underlying issues with regulation and access. So unless that starts to be sorted out, I'm not sure where the opportunity is, although we're starting to see a few providers enter into that market, because as soon as the access is available, the market opportunity there is actually pretty big. So as an overall statement of what do we get out of these markets, no two of these markets are the same. You can't look at the European market and go, well, how do we go into there, and can we use the exact same strategy to get into a new market as we have in our first market? Interestingly, if you look in there, we see a lot of, well, Cisco has a penetration into all of these markets, but very at the high end, and we're seeing quite a large number of smaller platform providers as well. If we look at the French market, Centile has a large market penetration there, and has done very well in growing inside that market. We're also seeing Broadsoft and Genband start to move into these markets as well, but other markets like the UK and Netherlands has a large base of smaller providers who are entering the market off their own self-built platform. And a lot of these are actually starting to grow quite strongly now and do fairly well. And it's interesting to see, and we'll discuss this later on, is who's going to be using the Switch in the future, what is the platform, and how do you move forward with your platform? Do you need to build higher or higher? When we're looking at international providers, we've seen an influx of American providers enter into the UK in recent years. And most of them are using UK as their jump off into Europe. How that will change in the next few years with the move to Brexit and whether we move out and whether they need European operations as well. And we're starting to see some people set up, so Fuse, who are here today, have moved into the Netherlands as well. But we're also seeing providers like Enfon as well grow from a German provider and spread across Europe. So it'll be interesting to see where the international providers go in the future and whether they're going to be able to target multiple markets themselves. On the graph you can see on the left is the number of service providers in each of these markets. And these are providers who have their own switch and run their own service, so not resellers. From you can see the UK and Dutch markets are heavily saturated. There's a large number of providers in there. And as we go down, it actually tends towards how many hosted VoIP seats. The larger the number of providers tends to translate really to the number of seats in the market. And also, the last point on there is pricing and proposition is changing. Oh, we have a question, sorry. Oh, sorry. You can't see that. Down here, that starts at 100 and comes down to 0. So each of those bars is 10 providers. Apologies, on my screen I can see quite clearly. So, apologies for that. So in the UK, we've got 92 service providers offering their own service. And going down to Italy, we're tracking 8 service providers in that market. So it's a real move down in terms of number of providers. And the UK and Netherlands, from there you can see from the graphs before, they are by far the largest markets there. So it does tend to say the number of service providers in the market does grow the market quite considerably. And also the last point on every market, none of the markets are the same. If you look at the propositions and the pricing in each of these markets, it varies massively to what's bundled into propositions, how they're pricing each of their features, whether they're bundling access in or whether they're going over the top as well. So it's a really interesting look at that market as well. So on that note, I'd like to invite our panel up who will be giving us a viewpoint on their views on the market and what they see as the drivers and barriers to hosted VoIP growth in their individual markets and across Europe. So could I introduce Dan, Alan, Mike, Mikhail, and Mark?